Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Think about the last time you worked yourself to the bone. Late nights, early mornings, sacrificing weekends, and still felt like you were running in place. You gave everything, and yet somehow, someone else who seemed to work less than you ended up with more. A better opportunity, a stronger relationship, a clear path forward. That's not bad luck. That's a thinking gap. Here's the truth. Nobody puts on a motivational poster. Hard work without strategic thinking is just expensive exhaustion. You can pour every ounce of energy into a leaking bucket and call it dedication. But the people who consistently win in their careers, relationships, finances, and personal lives aren't necessarily working harder than you. They're thinking differently, fundamentally, structurally, strategically differently. And that gap, it's not talent, it's not luck, it's not even connections. It's a skill, a learnable, trainable, deeply practical skill called strategic thinking. By the time you finish this, you won't just understand what strategic thinking is. You'll feel it shift something inside you. You'll start seeing your own life, your decisions, your relationships, your daily choices through a completely different lens, a sharper one that helps you spot what others miss, plan for what others ignore, and move through challenges that stop most people cold. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Why most people stay stuck and what's actually going on. Picture this. You wake up Monday morning. Before your feet even hit the floor, your phone is already buzzing. Emails, notifications, a message from a colleague about something that needs attention. You spend the first hour reacting, then the next. Then somehow it's 6 p.m. You're drained, and you haven't touched the one thing you actually needed to do that day. Sound familiar? This is called reactive living, and it's the default setting for most human beings on the planet. Not because people are lazy or undisciplined, but because nobody ever sat them down and said, hey, there's a completely different way to operate. Reactive people respond to whatever shows up first, loudest, or most urgently. They're constantly in motion, but rarely in direction. Their energy gets consumed by other people's priorities, unexpected fires, and the endless scroll of daily demands. And at the end of each week, they look back and wonder, why does it feel like I'm always busy, but never actually moving forward? Strategic thinkers live in a different world, even when they're navigating the exact same circumstances. They've made a fundamental shift in how they see life. Instead of viewing life as a series of random events that happen to them, they see it as a dynamic system they can actually influence. They understand that where they are right now isn't permanent. It's a position, and positions can be changed deliberately, intentionally, strategically. Here's one of the most powerful realizations you can have. Your current situation is not your final destination. It's just where you happen to be standing right now. The question isn't whether your life will change. It will. The question is whether you'll be the one directing that change or whether you'll just be along for the ride. Strategic thinkers choose to hold the wheel. Now, what does that actually look like in practice? It means developing the ability to zoom out and see the bigger picture while staying engaged with the details that matter today. Most people get trapped at one extreme or the other. Either they're so deep in the weeds of daily tasks that they've completely lost sight of where they're headed, or they're so focused on some distant dream that they never take real action today. Strategic thinking is the bridge between vision and execution. It lets you hold both at once without losing either. It also means understanding something crucial. Everything in your life is connected. Your energy levels affect your decision-making. Your financial stress bleeds into your relationships. The habits you build at work shape the kind of person you become at home. Strategic thinkers don't compartmentalize their lives into neat little boxes. They see the web, the invisible threads connecting all these areas, and they make decisions that account for the whole picture, not just the part right in front of them. There's a concept used by military pilots called situational awareness, the ability to accurately perceive what's happening around you, understand what it means, and anticipate what's likely to come next. Most people operate without it. They see only what's directly in front of them. Strategic thinkers are constantly scanning, not out of anxiety, but out of genuine curiosity about how things are unfolding around them. And crucially, this scanning extends inward too. You cannot build a smart strategy based on a distorted picture of yourself. Strategic thinking requires an honest, clear-eyed view of what you're actually good at, where you genuinely struggle, and what you want out of your life. Not what you think you should want, but what actually matters to you. This isn't self-criticism, it's self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is one of the most powerful strategic assets you can possess. Here's something else worth sitting with. Strategic thinking isn't about finding simple answers to complex problems. Life isn't a multiple-choice test. It rarely gives you option A and option B with a clear right answer. Strategic thinkers are comfortable with complexity. They can hold two seemingly contradictory ideas at the same time and find the creative space where both can be true. They're not thrown off by ambiguity. They've learned to navigate it. They've also developed a different relationship with time. Not every good decision pays off immediately. Some of the best investments in skills, in relationships, in habits take months or years to show results. Strategic thinkers understand this. They balance what's needed right now with what they're building for later. They don't sacrifice long-term position for short-term relief. But they also don't get so focused on the future that they neglect the present. Finally, and this one is big, strategic thinking requires emotional regulation. The ability to stay calm and think clearly when everything around you is chaotic. When you're under pressure, when uncertainty is high, when the stakes feel enormous. That's when reactive thinking does the most damage. And that's exactly when strategic thinking matters most. Because while everyone else is panicking, you're still seeing clearly. That clarity, that's your edge. Chapter 2. The Mental Architecture of a Strategic Mind. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside the mind of someone who thinks strategically. Because it's not magic. It's not some mysterious gift reserved for a handful of exceptional people. It's a specific set of mental habits, practiced consistently until they become second nature, and you can build all of them. The first is pattern recognition. Everything around you follows patterns. Markets rise and fall in cycles. People behave predictably under certain kinds of pressure. Technologies follow adoption curves. Relationships move through identifiable phases. Most people notice these patterns after they've fully played out, which means the insight arrives too late to be useful. Strategic thinkers train themselves to spot patterns while they're still forming, to look at early signals and ask, What does this remind me of? What happened last time conditions like these emerged? Where's this heading? This requires a different way of consuming information. Instead of reading just for content, you read for structure. Instead of watching events unfold, you look for the forces creating those events. You don't just ask what happened, you ask why it happened, why it happened when it did, and what conditions made it possible. That deeper level of questioning is what separates pattern recognition from simple observation. The second mental habit is systems thinking. Most people think in straight lines. Cause leads to effect, action leads to reaction. Simple, linear, predictable. But real life is rarely linear. Real life is full of feedback loops, cascading effects, and unintended consequences. Think about the last time you tried to fix one problem in your life and it accidentally created 3 new ones. That's what happens when you think linearly inside a system that isn't linear. Systems thinkers understand that small changes can ripple outward in ways that seem wildly disproportionate to the initial input. They understand that sometimes the most powerful place to intervene in a system isn't the most obvious one. And they understand that trying to force change in one direction while ignoring the rest of the system usually backfires. There are 2 types of feedback loops worth understanding here. Positive loops amplify whatever's happening. Growth accelerates growth. Momentum builds momentum. Negative loops stabilize things. They push back against change, maintaining balance. Strategic thinkers learn to work with these loops instead of against them. When you want to create rapid change, you find positive loops you can trigger. When you want stability, you lean into negative loops that keep things grounded. The third habit is scenario thinking. Here's how most people plan. They pick the outcome they think is most likely, build a single plan around it, and then feel blindsided when reality shows up differently. Strategic thinkers prepare multiple mental models of how things might unfold, not just the most likely scenario, but several plausible ones, including uncomfortable ones. Not because they're pessimistic or anxious, but because having thought through multiple possibilities means they can recognize and respond to any of them quickly when they start to materialize. This isn't about predicting the future. It's about expanding your readiness for the future. When you've already mentally rehearsed how you'd respond to 3 or 4 different scenarios, you don't freeze when one of them actually shows up. You act. The fourth habit is temporal thinking, the ability to evaluate decisions across multiple time horizons simultaneously. Every choice you make has immediate effects, medium-term implications, and long-term consequences. Most people only think about the first layer. Strategic thinkers hold all 3 at once. They ask, what does this do for me right now? What does it set up or close off in the next 6 months? And where does this leave me 5 or 10 years from now? This kind of thinking also means recognizing that different phases of any journey require different strategies. What works when you're starting something new doesn't necessarily work when you're scaling it. What works when you're scaling doesn't work when you're maintaining and optimizing. Applying the right strategy to the wrong phase is one of the most common and costly mistakes people make. The fifth habit is metacognitive awareness, thinking about your own thinking. This one is underrated. Most people are entirely unconscious of their own mental patterns, which means they're trapped by them. They make the same kinds of mistakes repeatedly without ever recognizing the pattern They have the same cognitive blind spots without ever seeing them. Strategic thinkers make their thinking visible to themselves. They regularly ask, what assumptions am I making right now? What am I ignoring? What would someone who disagrees with me say? What would I think about this situation if I had completely different background knowledge? This isn't comfortable. Self-examination rarely is, but it's one of the most powerful growth levers available to you. And finally, emotional intelligence, not as a soft skill, as a strategic asset. Emotions are information. Your frustration is telling you something about your values. Your anxiety is pointing to something you care about. Your excitement is signaling alignment with something important. Strategic thinkers don't suppress emotions. They read them. They use them as data points in their decision-making rather than as noise that needs to be filtered out. At the same time, they don't let emotions make the decisions. There's a difference between acknowledging what you feel and letting that feeling override your judgment. Strategic thinkers learn to do both, honor the emotion and think clearly despite it. Together, these 6 habits form the mental architecture of a truly strategic mind. And here's the thing, none of them require a special type of brain. They require practice, consistency, and the willingness to think differently than most people around you. Chapter 3. The 7 Principles that Create Real Advantage. You've probably heard the phrase, work smarter, not harder. It's good advice, but nobody tells you what smarter actually looks like. What are the specific principles behind it? What's the actual architecture of advantage? After studying how consistently successful people operate, not just in business, but in relationships, personal growth, health, and every other dimension of life, certain patterns emerge, 7 of them specifically, 7 principles that show up again and again in people who seem to always land on their feet, always find opportunity where others find obstacles, and always seem to be a few steps ahead of where everyone else is standing. These aren't theories. They're operating laws. They work whether you're aware of them or not. But when you understand them consciously, you can work with them instead of stumbling through them by accident. Principle 1. Position before performance. Here's something most people get completely backwards. They focus almost entirely on performance, working harder, getting better, producing more, while almost completely ignoring positioning. And then they wonder why their hard work doesn't seem to translate into the results they expected. Think of it this way. Imagine 2 people with identical skill levels applying for the same opportunity. One of them spent the last 2 years quietly building relationships with the people making the decision. The other just showed up with a great resume. Who gets it? Positioning is about putting yourself in situations where good outcomes are probable, where your strengths are visible, where your weaknesses are protected, where you have multiple paths forward while others have few. It's not about manipulation. It's about awareness, knowing where you stand, how you're perceived, and what needs to shift to give yourself the best possible starting position before you even begin competing. And here's a subtle but powerful dimension of positioning. Sometimes the best position is to be underestimated. Sometimes it's to be seen as indispensable. Sometimes it's to be known as the person who always delivers quietly, without drama. Strategic thinkers think carefully about how they're perceived, not out of vanity, but because perception shapes opportunity in the real world. Principle 2. The right moment matters more than the right move. Timing isn't just luck. It's a skill. The same action, the same conversation, the same decision, the same request can succeed brilliantly or fail completely depending entirely on when it happens. Ask for a raise the day your boss finds out the company missed its targets and you've damaged the relationship. Ask after you've just delivered something that made the team look great and the conversation goes completely differently. Strategic timing means understanding cycles in markets, in relationships, in organizations, in your own energy. It means learning to recognize inflection points, those rare moments when conditions are shifting and a well-timed move can create disproportionate results. And it means having the patience to wait for those moments rather than acting just because you're ready to act. Patience, by the way, is one of the most undervalued strategic assets there is. The ability to not move when the conditions aren't right, to hold your position and wait, is just as important as the ability to act decisively when they are. Principle 3. Focus is a force multiplier. Here's one of the most honest things you'll read today. You cannot do everything well, not because you're not capable, but because attention is finite, energy is finite, and time is brutally, non-negotiably finite. Every person who has ever achieved something significant has done so by concentrating their resources on a small number of things that mattered most and ruthlessly letting go of everything else. This is concentration, and it applies to far more than just time management. It applies to your attention. You cannot meaningfully focus on everything, so you must choose what deserves your deepest thinking. It applies to your relationships. You cannot be deeply present for everyone, so you must invest in the connections that genuinely move you forward and fill you up. It applies to your opportunities. You cannot pursue every open door, so you must develop the judgment to recognize which ones actually align with where you're trying to go. Saying no is a strategic act. Every time you say yes to something that doesn't serve your direction, you're saying no to something that does. Strategic thinkers make that trade-off consciously. Principle 4. Find the lever, not the brute force. In physics, a lever lets you move something enormous with surprisingly little force, as long as you place it correctly and use the right fulcrum. The same principle shows up everywhere in human life. Strategic leverage is about finding the points where a small, well-placed effort creates results that are wildly disproportionate to the input. It's the opposite of grinding. It's not about doing more. It's about finding where doing less in the right place produces more than doing everything everywhere. Leverage shows up in many forms. A single strong relationship can open doors that years of cold outreach couldn't. A specific skill learned at the right time can multiply the value of everything else you already know. A well-timed decision made from a position of strength can change a trajectory in ways that months of effort in the wrong direction never could. The key question to ask yourself consistently is this: is there a smarter point of entry here? Is there a lever I'm not seeing? Before committing to brute force, ask whether there's a more elegant approach. Principle 5. Adaptability is the new stability. There's a version of stability that's actually just rigidity in disguise. It looks like sticking with what worked before, even when the environment has shifted. It looks like loyalty to a plan past the point where the plan makes sense. It looks like comfort with the familiar, even when the familiar is no longer serving you. Strategic thinkers understand that the world changes constantly, and the strategies that got you here will not necessarily get you there. Adaptation isn't weakness, it's intelligence responding to new information. But here's the nuance. Adaptation doesn't mean abandoning your core direction every time something gets hard. It means staying committed to where you're going while remaining flexible about how you get there. The destination can stay the same. The route needs to be responsive. Finding that balance between consistency and flexibility, between commitment and openness, is one of the ongoing challenges of strategic living. And it requires constant recalibration rather than a one-time decision. Principle 6. Information is only valuable when it's actionable. We live in an era of infinite information and a severe shortage of genuine insight. Everyone has access to roughly the same data. The strategic advantage doesn't come from having more information. It comes from processing it more effectively, seeing implications that others miss, and acting on those insights before they become common knowledge. This means cultivating sources that aren't just mainstream. It means reading across domains, not just within your field. It means having conversations with people who see the world differently than you do. And it means developing the discipline to actually act on what you learn, rather than collecting insights like trophies and doing nothing with them. There's also a flip side worth considering. Sometimes the most valuable strategic insight is understanding what other people don't know, or what they're misinterpreting. When you can see clearly what others are getting wrong, you gain an asymmetric advantage that's hard to replicate. Principle 7. Options are worth more than optimized plans. This one runs counter to a lot of conventional productivity advice. Most people are taught to pick a plan, commit fully, and execute. And yes, commitment matters. But strategic thinkers know that having multiple viable paths forward is often more valuable than having one perfect plan. Why? Because the future is uncertain. Conditions change, new information arrives. What looked optimal 6 months ago may look completely different today. If you've committed so fully to a single path that you lost the ability to pivot, you've traded flexibility for the illusion of clarity. Strategic optionality means making investments that open possibilities rather than close them. It means maintaining relationships across different circles rather than betting everything on one group. It means developing skills that are valuable in multiple scenarios rather than hyper-specializing for a single outcome. Flexibility has real value, even when it costs you some efficiency in the short term. These 7 principles don't operate in isolation. They reinforce each other in a self-reinforcing loop. Good positioning creates better timing opportunities. Proper timing enables smarter concentration. Concentration amplifies leverage. Leverage makes adaptation easier. Adaptation generates information advantages. Better information creates more options, and more options improve your positioning. When you start applying all 7 together, even imperfectly, something shifts. You stop feeling like you're always catching up. You start feeling like you're actually ahead of the curve. Chapter 4. Seeing what's really going on, the invisible layer. Most situations have 2 layers. The first layer is what's visible, what's being said out loud, what's formally agreed upon, what's officially happening. This is the layer most people spend all their time focusing on. The second layer is where the real dynamics live. Strategic thinkers Know that what's visible on the surface is often the least important part of what's happening. Underneath, there are hidden motivations, unspoken power dynamics, cultural undercurrents, psychological patterns, and systemic forces that shape outcomes far more powerfully than anything being openly discussed. Learning to read this invisible layer is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Hidden motivations are the starting point. What people say they want and what they actually want are frequently very different things. Someone might tell you they want efficiency, but what they really want is control. Someone might say they want feedback, but what they really want is validation. Someone might advocate loudly for a particular approach, but what they really want is to feel heard. You learn to read motivations not by listening to what people say in a single conversation, but by watching what they consistently do over time. Where do they put their energy? What lights them up? What makes them defensive? What do they protect, even when it's costly? Behavior over time tells you more than words in any given moment. Power dynamics are the second invisible layer. Every group, every team, every family, every organization has informal power structures that often matter far more than the official hierarchy. The person with the job title isn't always the person whose opinion actually shapes decisions. Sometimes, the most influential person in the room is the one who seems the least important, until you realize that everyone else depends on them for something crucial. Mapping these informal networks, understanding who influences whom, who holds veto power, who connects different groups, is essential for navigating any complex social environment effectively. Historical context is the third layer. Every current situation carries the weight of what happened before you arrived. Decisions made years ago, relationships formed or broken in the past, patterns established over time. Understanding this history helps you avoid repeating mistakes that others already made and recognize opportunities that others miss because they don't understand how the current moment evolved. Cultural dynamics are the fourth. Every group develops its own unwritten rules. What's rewarded, what's punished, what can be discussed openly, what has to stay underground. These cultural patterns often override formal policies entirely. Strategic thinkers learn to decode cultural signals rather than fighting against patterns they don't understand. You can't implement change that violates deep cultural norms, no matter how logical that change might seem on paper. Psychological patterns are the fifth. People have predictable tendencies. Some need extensive evidence before they'll commit to anything new. Others make fast decisions on limited information and then rationalize them afterward. Some are energized by competition. Others shut down under pressure. Some think in concrete details. Others need the big picture before they can engage with specifics. Understanding these patterns in the people around you lets you anticipate responses, tailor your approach, and design your communication in ways that actually land rather than ways that make sense to you but bounce off the people you're trying to reach. Systemic forces are the sixth layer. Every situation exists within larger currents. Economic trends, technological shifts, social movements, demographic changes. These forces create pressures and opportunities that dwarf anything any individual can generate through personal effort alone. Strategic thinkers learn to identify these larger currents and position themselves to benefit from them rather than trying to swim against them. You can't outwork a tidal shift, but you can learn to ride it. Feedback loops and unintended consequences complete the picture. Every action creates reactions. Those reactions create further reactions. Sometimes the ripple effects of a decision look nothing like the decision itself. Strategic thinkers develop the habit of asking, if I do this, what happens next? And then what? And then what after that? Reading all of these layers requires something that doesn't come naturally to most people: intellectual humility. The willingness to say, I might be wrong about what's really happening here. The moment you become certain you've figured out the full picture is often the moment you stop looking. And that's when surprises find you. Stay curious, stay open, keep gathering information even after you think you understand. The best strategic thinkers are perpetually curious students of the situations they're in. Chapter 5. The Art of Making Decisions. You won't regret. Every single day, you make hundreds of decisions. Most of them are small. What to eat, what to wear, which email to answer first. Your brain handles these automatically, running on habit and heuristic, barely registering them as choices at all. And that's fine. That's efficient. But then there are the other decisions, the ones that actually matter, the ones where the wrong choice can cost you months of progress, damage a relationship you've spent years building, or close a door you didn't realize you needed until it was already shut. These are the decisions where most people's default approach completely breaks down. Here's what typically happens. You face a significant choice. Your brain immediately latches onto the most obvious options, usually just two, because binary choices feel manageable. You spend most of your mental energy arguing between those two options, often unconsciously favoring the one you already wanted. Before you started analyzing, you make the decision, and then you spend the next several months either defending it or quietly wondering if you got it wrong. Strategic decision-making is a completely different process, not more complicated. Actually, once you understand it, it simplifies everything, but fundamentally different in structure and intention. It starts before you even consider the options. It starts with how you frame the decision itself. Here's something most people never realize. The way a decision is framed determines which solutions you'll even think to consider. Frame it wrong, and you're solving the wrong problem, brilliantly, efficiently, completely solving the wrong problem. Before jumping to options, strategic thinkers pause and ask, what am I actually deciding here? Not what I think I'm deciding, not what the situation seems to call for on the surface. What is the real choice in front of me? Sometimes, what looks like a decision between two specific options is actually a question about underlying values. Sometimes, what looks like a resource allocation question is actually a question about priorities. Sometimes, the decision you think you need to make isn't actually the decision at all. It's a symptom of a deeper question you haven't asked yet. Getting the frame right changes everything that follows. The second step is expanding your options aggressively. Most people consider only the most obvious alternatives. Option A or option B. Stay or leave. Say yes or say no. But those first obvious options are rarely the best ones. They're just the ones that came to mind first, which means they're the most familiar, not the most creative or the most strategically sound. Strategic decision makers actively generate alternatives that others miss. They ask, what would I do if neither of these options existed? They look at how similar challenges have been handled in completely different fields and adapt those approaches. They combine elements from multiple obvious solutions to create something new. They question the assumptions baked into the original framing, like the assumption that a decision has to be made right now, or that the resources available are fixed, or that the constraint causing the problem can't be changed. Generating creative options isn't just a brainstorming exercise, it's a discipline. It requires you to push past the comfortable familiarity of obvious choices and spend real time in the uncomfortable territory of possibility. The third step is evaluation, and this is where most people make a critical error. They evaluate options based on the single most likely outcome. They pick the choice that seems best if things go roughly as expected, and they call that rational analysis. But strategic evaluation is probabilistic, not deterministic. It considers the full range of possible outcomes, not just the most likely one, and weights them by their respective probabilities. It asks, what's the upside if this works? What's the downside if it doesn't? How likely is each? And crucially, how bad is the downside? An option with a moderate most likely outcome but enormous upside potential might be far superior to one with a slightly higher most likely outcome but no upside at all. An option with a good expected outcome but catastrophic downside risk might be inferior to one with a lower expected outcome and a manageable worst case. Strategic thinkers also evaluate across time, not just, what does this do for me now? But what does this open up or close off in 6 months? What does this position me for in 3 years? Some decisions look mediocre in the short term and transformative over time. Others look great immediately and quietly cost you something important later. The fourth step is bias interruption. Here's something uncomfortable but important. Your brain is not a neutral analytical machine. It's a pattern recognition system that evolved to help you survive, not to optimize your long-term strategic outcomes. And it comes with a set of systematic biases that will actively sabotage your decision-making if you don't account for them. Confirmation bias makes you unconsciously seek out information that supports what you already believe and discount information that challenges it. Anchoring bias makes the first number or option you encounter disproportionately influential, even when it's completely irrelevant. Sunk cost bias makes you factor in resources you've already spent, time, money, emotional energy, when rationally those resources are gone and shouldn't affect forward-looking decisions at all. You cannot eliminate these biases, but you can interrupt them with deliberate practices. One of the most powerful is called a pre-mortem. Before you commit to a decision, imagine that 6 months from now the decision turned out to be a complete failure. Not maybe a failure, a definitive one. Now ask yourself, what went wrong? What did I miss? What did I assume that turned out to be false? This exercise forces your brain out of optimism mode and into honest assessment mode. It surfaces risks and blind spots that forward-looking analysis consistently misses. Another practice is steel-manning the alternative. Take the option you're not leaning toward and build the strongest possible case for it. Not the weakest case, the strongest one you can construct. If you can't build a compelling case for the alternative, you probably haven't thought it through enough. If you can, you now have real information about the genuine trade-offs you're making. The fifth step, the one most strategic frameworks forget entirely, is implementation. A decision that isn't executed isn't a decision, it's a wish. Strategic implementation means translating your choice into specific, concrete next actions. Who does what, by when, with what resources, measured by what indicators. It means identifying the most likely points where the plan could break down and building contingencies for those points in advance, not after they've already happened. It also means building in feedback loops, regular check-ins where you honestly assess, is this working? What am I learning? What needs to adjust? Not just hoping it works and finding out too late that it didn't. And finally, perhaps most importantly, strategic decision-making means being genuinely willing to change course when evidence suggests you should. Not because you're indecisive, but because real intelligence updates based on real information. Staying committed to a failing strategy out of ego or sunk cost isn't loyalty to your decision. It's just expensive stubbornness. Chapter 6. Thinking 3 moves ahead without losing your mind. There's a reason people find chess compelling even if they've never played it seriously. It captures something true about how life actually works. Every move creates consequences. Those consequences create new situations. Those new situations require responses. And the player who can see further down that chain, who can think through not just their next move, but the moves that will follow from it, has a profound and consistent advantage over the player who can only see one step at a time. Most people in real life think one step ahead. They consider how others will immediately react to something they do. They think about the most direct consequence of a decision. They respond to what's right in front of them without much thought for what that response sets in motion downstream. Strategic thinkers think further ahead, not with perfect certainty. Nobody can see the future with certainty, but with enough foresight to anticipate likely progressions and position themselves accordingly before others even realize what's coming. The foundation of this is understanding cause and effect chains. Every action you take sets a sequence in motion. Your action triggers a response from someone else. Their response changes the situation. The changed situation triggers further responses from them, from others, from the environment itself. Most of the time, these chains play out in ways that are actually quite predictable if you take the time to think them through. Strategic thinkers develop the habit of following these chains mentally before committing to action. Not indefinitely. You can't think through every possible branching path to infinity, but far enough ahead to identify the most likely complications and prepare for them. A powerful technique for doing this is called backward induction. Instead of starting from where you are now and projecting forward, you start from where you want to be and work backward. You ask, what would need to be true for me to be in that position? What moves would create those conditions? What would need to happen before those moves are even possible? This reveals something that pure forward thinking often misses, which early decisions are actually foundational to everything that follows, and which ones feel important but are actually just noise. The second dimension of thinking ahead is understanding commitment. When you make a credible commitment to a particular course of action, you change the strategic landscape for everyone around you. People adjust their behavior based on what they expect you to do. If they know you'll follow through on something, they may not even bother trying to block it. If they're uncertain, they'll probe and test and try to exploit that uncertainty. Commitments are powerful, but they're double-edged. A commitment that others believe gives you strategic leverage. A commitment that locks you into a path you can no longer change is a trap. Strategic thinkers are thoughtful about what they commit to publicly and what they keep flexible. The third dimension is understanding who you're dealing with. Not everyone responds to the same inputs in the same ways. Some people are fundamentally collaborative. They're looking for win-win. They respond well to partnership framing. They get energized by shared goals. Others are fundamentally competitive. They interpret everything through a lens of who's winning and who's losing, and they respond to strength and clear boundaries more than to warmth and openness. Some people are driven by principles and will hold their position even when it's costly. Others are entirely pragmatic and will shift based on incentives and circumstances. Some need time and information to make decisions. Others decide quickly and then look for confirmation. Understanding which type of person you're dealing with and recognizing that the same person can shift between modes depending on context and stakes is one of the most practically useful aspects of strategic anticipation. It lets you predict responses, tailor your approach, and avoid surprises that feel shocking to everyone who didn't see them coming, but were entirely predictable to anyone paying attention. The fourth dimension is tempo. Every situation has a natural rhythm. Things unfold at a certain pace. Strategic thinkers understand this rhythm and understand that they can sometimes influence it. Sometimes you want to accelerate the pace. Move quickly before others can organize an effective response. Create momentum that makes it harder for opposition to form. Force decisions before people have time to overthink them. Other times, you want to slow things down. Buy yourself time to prepare. Let unfavorable conditions shift. Allow confusion or resistance to dissipate naturally before pushing forward. And sometimes, the most powerful move is to disrupt the expected tempo entirely, to act at a completely unexpected moment, in an unexpected way, creating confusion and uncertainty in anyone who is planning based on the normal rhythm. The fifth dimension is scenario branching. Rather than betting everything on one version of the future, strategic thinkers prepare contingent responses to multiple possible developments. If X happens, I'll do A. If Y happens instead, I'll do B. If both X and Y happen simultaneously, I'll do C. This isn't anxiety, it's preparation, and it has a transformative effect on how you experience uncertainty. When you've already mentally prepared for multiple scenarios, uncertainty stops feeling threatening. It just becomes information, new data that tells you which branch of your pre-prepared response tree to follow. Finally, and this is crucial, thinking ahead requires you to never confuse tactics with strategy. Tactics are specific moves. Strategy is the overall direction those moves are serving. It's entirely possible to be brilliant tactically and strategically lost, to win a series of individual battles while quietly losing the war because you've been so focused on each engagement that you've lost sight of where you're actually trying to go. Strategic thinkers keep the destination visible, even when they're deep in the middle of tactical execution. They regularly zoom out and ask, does what I'm doing right now actually serve where I'm trying to end up? If the answer is no, even if what they're doing is working by narrow measures, they adjust. Chapter 7, The Leverage Multiplier, Doing Less, Achieving More. Let's be honest about something. Most advice about success is secretly just advice about working harder. Be more disciplined, wake up earlier, put in more hours, build more habits, optimize more systems. And there's nothing wrong with discipline or hard work, but there's a ceiling on what brute force can produce. You only have so many hours, so much energy, so much attention. At some point, working harder stops being the answer because you're already working as hard as you sustainably can. The people who consistently produce extraordinary results aren't just working harder than everyone else. They've found leverage. They've found the places where their effort multiplies, where 1 unit of input produces 5 or 10 or 50 units of output. And that changes everything. Positional leverage is the first form. It comes from being at the right junction in a network or system, a place where you naturally intersect with opportunities, decisions, and resources. Being positioned as the connector between two important groups that don't normally interact. Being established as the go-to expert in an emerging area before it becomes crowded. Being known as the person who can translate between two worlds, technical and creative, operational and strategic, local and global. Positional leverage isn't about being everywhere. It's about being at the right place, the place where value flows and where your presence amplifies outcomes for everyone involved. Informational leverage is the second form. Having insight that others don't have or haven't yet processed gives you a genuine and significant advantage, not through unethical means, but through superior synthesis, through reading across domains and spotting connections that specialists in any single field would miss, through paying attention to early signals that most people dismiss as noise, through having the intellectual courage to act on insights before they've been validated by the crowd. Relationship leverage is the third, and one of the most underestimated. The right relationship can give you access to resources, opportunities, information, and capabilities that would take years to develop independently. One conversation with the right person at the right moment can redirect an entire trajectory. But relationship leverage isn't built through transactional networking. It's built through genuine contribution over time, through helping people achieve their goals before you need anything from them, through showing up consistently, not just when you need something, through being the kind of person others genuinely want to see succeed. Because your success has consistently meant good things for the people around you. Technological leverage is the fourth. The tools available today allow individuals to produce, distribute, automate, and scale in ways that were simply impossible a generation ago. But the strategic angle here isn't just using existing tools, it's understanding where technology is heading and positioning yourself ahead of that curve. Learning skills that will become more valuable as automation handles more routine work. Building systems that scale beyond your personal time and effort. Creating assets that can generate value while you sleep. Capital leverage, the fifth form, extends beyond financial capital, though that matters too. It includes reputational capital, the accumulated credibility that allows you to access opportunities unavailable to people who haven't established that track record. It includes social capital, the goodwill and trust stored in your relationships that can be mobilized when you need support, collaboration, or advocacy. These forms of capital compound over time, which means the earlier you start building them intentionally, the more powerful they become. Systemic leverage, the sixth, is perhaps the most sophisticated. It's the ability to understand how systems operate and identify the specific intervention points where a small change produces a large shift in system behavior. Rather than working harder within existing systems, you work to understand the systems themselves, the rules that govern them, the goals they're optimizing for, the paradigms that shape how people think about them. Intervening at the right level of a system can produce results that no amount of effort at the operational level could match. Temporal leverage, the seventh, is about timing. Not just the timing of individual moves, but the timing of capability development, relationship investment, and positioning relative to emerging trends. Acting early, before something becomes obvious to everyone, creates advantages that latecomers simply cannot replicate, regardless of how much effort they apply. The most powerful strategic positions combine multiple forms of leverage simultaneously. When you're well-positioned and well-informed and deeply connected and technologically enabled and reputation-rich, the combined effect is exponential, not additive. One important warning: leverage amplifies in both directions. The same factors that can create extraordinary positive results can also create extraordinary negative results if applied incorrectly or without sufficient risk management. Leverage without wisdom is how small mistakes become catastrophic ones. Use it, but use it thoughtfully. Chapter 8. Strategic Communication. What you say is only half the story. Here's something that might surprise you. The most strategic thing you do on any given day probably isn't a decision you make in private. It's a conversation you have with another person. Every interaction you have is a strategic moment, not in a manipulative or calculated way, but in the sense that every conversation either builds something or diminishes something. It either moves you closer to where you want to go or quietly pulls you further away. It either strengthens a relationship or subtly erodes it. It either positions you more effectively or leaves an impression you didn't intend. Most people communicate reactively. Something happens, they respond. Someone says something, they reply. The conversation unfolds. They participate. And at the end, they wonder why things didn't land the way they hoped, why their great idea got dismissed, why the negotiation went sideways, why someone misunderstood their intentions, despite how clearly they thought they'd explained themselves. Strategic communicators approach every meaningful interaction with intention, not rigidity. Genuine conversation requires real presence and responsiveness, but intention, a sense of what they're trying to accomplish, who they're talking to, and how to create the conditions where genuine connection and genuine progress can happen simultaneously. The first foundation is understanding how people actually make decisions. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't make decisions rationally and then have feelings about them afterward. They make decisions emotionally and then construct rational justifications afterward. The logical argument you spent an hour perfecting, it matters, but it matters far less than whether the person you're talking to feels heard, respected, understood, and aligned with you. This doesn't mean abandoning logic. It means understanding the sequence. Emotional connection first. Logical argument second. Trust before evidence. Relationship before proposal. When you try to persuade someone with pure logic before you've established that emotional foundation, you're essentially trying to build the second floor of a house before the first floor exists. The argument might be structurally sound, but there's nothing underneath to support it. The second foundation is genuine audience understanding. Different people process information differently. Some are energized by data, evidence, and structured reasoning. Give them the numbers, show them the logic, let them work through the analysis themselves, and they'll trust their own conclusions. Others are moved by stories, by concrete examples, by the human dimension of an idea. Show them what this looks like in real life. Help them feel what it would mean to experience it, and they'll come alive in ways that a spreadsheet could never produce. Some people need to feel like pioneers, early adopters of something new and important. Others need social proof, evidence that people they respect have already validated this idea. Some need time and space to process before committing. Others decide quickly and need you to match their pace. Strategic communicators develop the ability to rapidly read these differences and adapt, not by changing their message, but by changing the packaging. The authentic truth you're trying to convey stays the same, but you translate it into the language that actually reaches this particular person. This isn't manipulation, it's respect. It's recognizing that communication isn't just about what you say, it's about what the other person actually receives. Framing is the third dimension, and it might be the most powerful tool in your communication arsenal. The same information, presented through different frames, creates completely different responses. Consider these two descriptions of the same situation. This approach has a 20% failure rate versus this approach succeeds 80% of the time. Identical information, completely different emotional impact. Different decisions will follow from each framing. Strategic framing means understanding what your audience values most deeply, their priorities, their fears, their aspirations, and presenting your message through a lens that naturally resonates with those things. If you're talking to someone who values security above all else, you frame your idea in terms of what it protects and preserves. If you're talking to someone driven by growth and ambition, you frame the same idea in terms of what it unlocks and enables. The frame isn't spin. The frame is emphasis. You're highlighting the dimensions of a real situation that are most relevant to this particular person's genuine concerns. Done authentically, this creates connection. Done inauthentically, people sense the manipulation immediately, and trust evaporates. Timing within communication is the fourth dimension, not just when to have a conversation, though that matters enormously, but how to sequence what you say within a conversation. The same information lands differently depending on what comes before and after it. A concern raised at the beginning of a conversation creates a different dynamic than the same concern raised after you've established genuine common ground. A request made after you've demonstrated real understanding of someone's situation lands completely differently than the same request made cold. Strategic communicators think about sequencing. They plant seeds early and let them grow before pressing for decisions. They establish shared values before introducing proposals. They address likely objections proactively, not defensively, but confidently, rather than waiting to be challenged on them. The fifth dimension is the psychology of influence, used ethically. There are certain principles of human psychology that consistently shape how people respond to communication. Understanding them doesn't make you manipulative. Ignoring them just makes you less effective. Reciprocity. People feel a genuine pull to return what they've received. When you give value generously, sharing a useful insight, making a helpful introduction, offering support without immediately expecting anything back, you create a natural inclination toward reciprocity that strengthens relationships and opens doors over time. Social proof. People look to others' behavior as a guide when they're uncertain. When you can genuinely demonstrate that people similar to your audience have already embraced something, you dramatically reduce the psychological friction of adoption. Consistency. People have a deep need to appear consistent with their previous stated positions. Small agreements create momentum toward larger agreements. When someone has already said yes to something small and related, saying yes to something larger feels natural rather than threatening. Scarcity and genuine urgency. When something is authentically limited in time, in availability, in opportunity, communicating that reality creates appropriate motivation. The key word is authentically. Manufactured urgency backfires badly when people see through it, and they usually do. The sixth dimension, and the one that underlies all the others, is credibility. All the framing and timing and audience understanding in the world doesn't work if the person you're communicating with doesn't trust you. Trust is the foundational currency of influence. Without it, even the most perfectly constructed message falls flat. With it, even imperfect communication tends to land well. Credibility is built over time through consistency between what you say and what you do, through delivering on commitments even when it's inconvenient, through being honest about uncertainty rather than projecting false confidence, through treating people with genuine respect regardless of what you need from them in a given moment, and, perhaps most importantly, through authenticity. People have extraordinarily sophisticated unconscious detectors for inauthenticity. They may not be able to articulate exactly what feels off, but they feel it. Strategic communicators align their communication with their genuine values and real intentions, finding ways to be both authentic and effective rather than treating those as opposing goals. Finally, remember that every interaction leaves a residue. Every conversation creates an expectation for the next one. Every commitment kept or broken shapes what people believe you'll do in the future. Every time you treat someone with genuine respect or quiet dismissiveness, it accumulates into a reputation that either opens doors or quietly closes them. Strategic communicators think beyond the immediate conversation to the relationship and reputation being built or eroded through the accumulation of all these interactions over time. Chapter 9. When Everything Goes Wrong, Navigating Crisis and Finding the Hidden Opportunity. Let's talk about the moments nobody plans for. The job loss you didn't see coming. The relationship that collapsed in ways you didn't anticipate. The project that fell apart despite everything you did right. The external event that reshuffled the entire landscape overnight. Crisis. Disruption. The rug pulled out from under you. Here's the first thing strategic thinkers understand about crisis. It's not a question of whether it will happen. It's a question of when and whether you'll be ready. No level of preparation eliminates uncertainty. No amount of planning makes you immune to disruption. Markets shift. Relationships change. Health challenges emerge. Technologies make skills obsolete. Unexpected events reshape entire contexts overnight. This is the nature of living in a complex, dynamic world. Accepting this reality, genuinely accepting it, not just intellectually acknowledging it, is the first act of strategic crisis. Preparation. Because when you accept that disruption is inevitable, you stop being shocked by it. And when you stop being shocked, you stop wasting precious time and energy on denial and start responding effectively from the first moment. Preparation before the crisis is the first strategic act. Strategic thinkers build resilience into their lives before they need it. Multiple income streams rather than complete dependence on a single source. Diverse skills that remain valuable across different contexts rather than hyper-specialization in a single function. Relationships spread across different networks rather than concentrated entirely in one. Financial buffers that create breathing room when income disrupts. Emotional practices, mindfulness, physical exercise, strong personal relationships that maintain psychological stability under pressure. These aren't just nice-to-haves, they're strategic infrastructure. The difference between someone who can navigate a crisis while thinking clearly and someone who gets flattened by it often comes down to the resilient systems they built during the calm periods. When crisis hits, the first imperative is maintaining clarity of thought. This is harder than it sounds. Crisis triggers a physiological stress response that was designed for physical threats, fight, flight, freeze. In a genuine physical emergency, this response is appropriate and useful. In the complex, nuanced, multi-layered challenges that modern crises typically involve, it's actively counterproductive. It narrows your attention, accelerates your thinking in ways that sacrifice accuracy for speed, and pulls you toward the most obvious response rather than the most effective one. Strategic crisis navigation means developing the ability to interrupt this response, to create space between the trigger and the reaction, to breathe literally before acting, to slow down precisely when everything in you is screaming to speed up. This mental clarity allows you to assess the situation accurately rather than reacting to your fears about the situation. What has actually changed? What remains the same? What new constraints has this crisis created? What new opportunities, and yes, there are almost always new opportunities embedded in genuine disruption, has it potentially opened? The second crisis principle is triage, ruthless, honest prioritization. Crisis typically creates multiple urgent problems simultaneously. The temptation is to try to address all of them at once, which usually means addressing none of them effectively. Strategic thinkers make hard choices about what actually requires immediate attention and what can wait. The prioritization framework is simple but powerful. Focus first on actions that preserve the most options for future decision-making. Some crisis responses close doors permanently. Others keep multiple paths forward while addressing the immediate problem. When you're uncertain what to do, default to the choice that keeps more options open. The third principle is speed, but calibrated speed. In crisis, conditions change rapidly. Windows of opportunity open and close quickly. Waiting too long for perfect information means missing the moment when decisive action could have changed everything. But speed without judgment is just chaos. Strategic crisis navigation means developing frameworks for making rapid decisions with incomplete information, not reckless decisions, but confident ones. Decisions made with the best available information, held lightly enough to update as new information arrives, executed with enough commitment to actually produce results. Now, Here's the part most people miss entirely. Crisis as opportunity. When established patterns break down, the competitive landscape reshapes. People and organizations that were dominant in the old structure may find themselves disoriented and slow to adapt. New spaces open, new needs emerge, new alliances become possible, new solutions become relevant that nobody would have paid attention to before the disruption. Strategic thinkers train themselves to hold two things simultaneously during crisis: honest acknowledgement of what's genuinely difficult and genuine curiosity about what new possibilities the disruption has created. This isn't toxic positivity. It's not pretending things are fine when they're not. It's recognizing that the same force that's dismantling the old structure is simultaneously creating the conditions for a new one, and that the person who can see the new structure taking shape while others are still mourning the old one has an extraordinary strategic advantage. Ask yourself during any disruption, who needs something right now that they couldn't get before? What has this changed that actually needed changing? What am I capable of that this new environment values more than the old one did? Crisis also creates the conditions for accelerated development. Skills that take years to build gradually can be acquired in months when necessity demands it. Habits that seemed impossible to establish in comfortable circumstances become non-negotiable when the stakes are high enough. Relationships that might have stayed at a surface level for years deepen rapidly in the crucible of shared challenge. Strategic thinkers recognize that some of their most significant growth in capability, in character, in clarity about what actually matters, has come not from the smooth periods, but from the disruptive ones. They don't seek out crisis unnecessarily, but they stop fearing it with the kind of dread that makes them freeze when it arrives. Finally, post-traumatic growth. Psychology has documented something remarkable. Many people who navigate significant adversity don't just return to their previous baseline. They emerge genuinely stronger, more capable, and more clear-eyed than they were before. Not despite the crisis, partly because of it. This doesn't happen automatically. It requires reflection, the willingness to ask, what did I learn? What did this reveal about my actual values versus my stated ones? What did it reveal about where I was genuinely resilient and where I was more fragile than I realized? What would I do differently and what actually worked? The people who extract genuine growth from difficult experiences aren't the ones who suffered more. They're the ones who reflected more. They treated the crisis as a course that was teaching them something essential, even when the curriculum was brutal. Chapter 10. Building Your Personal Strategic Operating System. Everything we've covered so far, the mindset shifts, the mental habits, the 7 principles, the decision-making frameworks, the communication tools, the crisis navigation skills, none of it produces lasting results if it only shows up occasionally when you remember to apply it. Strategic thinking has to become your default operating mode, the way you habitually approach situations, not just the special framework you pull out for big decisions. This requires building what I'd call your personal strategic operating system, a set of integrated structures, routines, and practices that run continuously in the background of your life, ensuring that strategic thinking shapes your daily experience rather than just your occasional peak moments. Think of it like the operating system on your phone. You don't consciously think about it while you're using your apps. It's just running, managing resources, coordinating processes, ensuring everything works together. Your personal strategic operating system works the same way. Once built, it operates largely automatically, freeing your conscious attention for the unique challenges of each situation rather than having to rebuild your strategic framework from scratch every time you need it. The first component is your personal mission and values framework, not an inspirational statement. For your wall, a genuine, honest, specific articulation of what you're actually trying to build with your life, what you genuinely value, and what you're willing to trade off to pursue those things. This framework functions as a decision filter. When opportunities arise, it helps you quickly assess, does this align with where I'm genuinely trying to go? When conflicts emerge between competing priorities, it helps you identify which choice is most consistent with what actually matters to you. When you're tempted by something shiny that might pull you off course, it provides the clarity to recognize the distraction for what it is. The framework needs to be honest, not aspirational in a way that's disconnected from reality. Not what you think you should value, what you actually value, what you consistently prioritize when push comes to shove, what you're genuinely willing to sacrifice for, what kind of person you're becoming through the accumulation of your daily choices. The second component is a systematic information and environmental scanning practice. Strategic thinkers don't wait for important information to find them by accident. They create deliberate structures for staying informed about the trends, shifts, and emerging patterns in the areas that matter most to their objectives. This might mean a consistent weekly reading practice across sources from different domains and perspectives. It might mean cultivating relationships that give you access to perspectives and information you wouldn't otherwise encounter. It might mean developing the habit of regularly asking, what's changing in my field? What's emerging that isn't on most people's radar yet? What assumptions that everyone around me takes for granted might not hold in 3 years? The goal isn't to consume more information. It's to maintain genuine awareness of the changing landscape you're operating in, so you're never caught completely off guard by shifts that were visible in advance to anyone who was paying attention. The third component is a decision-making framework matched to different types of choices. Not every decision deserves the same analytical process. Applying heavy strategic analysis to routine choices creates decision fatigue without adding value. Applying fast, intuitive judgment to high-stakes, irreversible choices is how people make expensive mistakes. Your operating system should include different modes for different types of decisions. Routine choices get systematized. You create default behaviors and policies that handle them automatically. Major choices get structured analysis, the full process we covered in Chapter 5. Crisis choices get pre-built frameworks that allow rapid response without sacrificing judgment. The fourth component is a multi-horizon planning system, one that connects your daily actions to your weekly priorities to your monthly objectives, your monthly objectives to your annual goals, and your annual goals to your long-term vision. Most people either have detailed short-term plans with no long-term direction or inspiring long-term visions with no daily discipline. Strategic thinkers build the bridge between these levels, ensuring that what they do today is actually connected to where they're trying to go in 5 years, and that their long-term vision is actually being advanced by their daily behavior rather than just being a pleasant fantasy they revisit occasionally. The fifth component is a resource allocation discipline. You have finite time, attention, energy, and money. Distributed carelessly, they produce mediocre results across many fronts. Concentrated strategically, they can produce exceptional results in the areas that actually matter. This means making your trade-offs consciously. Every yes is a no to something else. Every hour spent on something low priority is an hour not spent on something high priority. Strategic thinkers make these choices deliberately rather than letting them happen by default, and they regularly reassess whether their current allocation still makes sense given their objectives and changing circumstances. The sixth component is a structured reflection and learning practice. This is perhaps the most underinvested component in most people's strategic development. The raw material of strategic wisdom is experience, but experience alone doesn't produce wisdom. Reflected experience produces wisdom. Without regular honest reflection, you can repeat the same mistakes indefinitely, each time with slightly different surface details, but the same underlying pattern. With it, you extract genuine insight from both your successes and your failures, gradually building the sophisticated judgment that distinguishes true strategic mastery from just knowing strategic concepts. A simple weekly reflection practice. Even 15 minutes of honest journaling about what worked, what didn't, what you learned, and what you do differently compounds dramatically over time. The seventh component is your relationship and network management system, not a spreadsheet of contacts. A genuine practice of investing in relationships that create mutual value, maintaining connections during good times so they're available during challenging ones, and regularly asking, how can I help the people in my network achieve what they're trying to accomplish right now? Strategic relationship building is a long game. The relationships you invest in today, without any expectation of immediate return, are often the ones that become most valuable 5 or 10 years from now in ways you couldn't have predicted. Together, these 7 components form an integrated system, not a rigid structure, but a living framework that evolves as you evolve and as your circumstances change. Building it takes time, but once built, it changes how you experience every day, not just the big moments, but the ordinary ones. Because strategic thinking, applied consistently to ordinary moments, is what produces extraordinary outcomes over time. Chapter 11. The psychology behind every strategic interaction. You've been in a conversation where logic wasn't enough. You had the facts, you had the argument, you had the data, and somehow, frustratingly, confusingly, none of it moved the person in front of you. They nodded. They said they understood. And then they did exactly what they were going to do before the conversation started. Sound familiar? Here's what was actually happening. You were operating at the level of information while the decision was being made at the level of psychology. And until you understand how human psychology actually shapes behavior, not how we wish it worked, but how it actually works, you'll keep running into this invisible wall. Advanced strategic thinking means understanding the psychological architecture underneath every human interaction, not to exploit people, not to manipulate outcomes through deception, but to work with how human beings actually function rather than how we theoretically should function in a perfectly rational world. The foundational insight is this: people don't respond to objective reality. They respond to their perception of reality. Two people can face identical circumstances and have completely different responses, not because their circumstances differ, but because their perception of those circumstances differs. One person sees a challenge as an exciting opportunity. Another sees the same challenge as an overwhelming threat. One person hears feedback as valuable input. Another hears the same feedback as personal attack. This means that influencing perception, how a situation is framed, how information is presented, what context surrounds a message, can be more powerful than changing actual conditions. And understanding how others perceive situations gives you a profound strategic advantage that purely factual thinking simply cannot match. The first psychological principle to understand is the architecture of cognitive bias. Your brain is not a neutral processing machine. It's a pattern recognition system built for survival, which means it takes shortcuts, lots of them. These shortcuts, cognitive biases, operate largely below conscious awareness, shaping how everyone around you perceives information, evaluates options, and makes decisions. The availability heuristic causes people to judge how likely something is based on how easily they can recall an example of it. If you want someone to perceive a risk as significant, you provide a vivid, memorable, concrete example of that risk materializing, not abstract statistics. The human brain responds to stories and images far more powerfully than to data. The anchoring effect means that the first number or option someone encounters disproportionately shapes all subsequent judgments. If you're negotiating, the first offer sets an anchor that everything else gets measured against, which is why strategic communicators are very deliberate about what they put on the table first and when. Confirmation bias means people unconsciously seek information that supports what they already believe while discounting information that challenges it. This has a crucial practical implication. If you want to change someone's mind, starting with a frontal assault on their existing belief almost never works. It triggers defensiveness and entrenches the position further. A more effective approach is finding genuine points of agreement first, building a bridge, and then introducing the new perspective from a place of shared ground. The second principle is commitment and consistency. People have a deep psychological need to appear consistent with their previous statements and behaviors. Once someone has publicly committed to a position, especially in front of others, they will go to remarkable lengths to maintain and justify that commitment, even when new evidence suggests they were wrong. This isn't weakness or irrationality, it's how identity works. Changing your mind requires acknowledging that your previous judgment was flawed, which threatens self-image and social standing simultaneously. It's psychologically far easier to find new reasons why your original position was right than to admit it wasn't. Strategic thinkers use this by seeking small agreements that naturally build toward larger ones, not through manipulation, but through genuine understanding of psychological momentum. When someone has said yes to something small and related, the path toward yes on something larger becomes naturally smoother. Each small commitment creates psychological consistency that makes the next commitment easier. The third principle is social proof. When people are uncertain about what to do, which in complex situations is, most of the time, they look to others' behavior as a guide. They ask, consciously or unconsciously, what are people like me doing in situations like this? This creates powerful cascading effects. Early adoption by respected individuals signals safety and validity to everyone watching. Visible momentum, even when it starts small, accelerates further momentum. The perception that something is gaining traction becomes in itself a reason for others to get on board. Strategic application of social proof means being thoughtful about whose adoption you highlight and in what sequence. The right early advocates, people your audience genuinely respects and identifies with, do more work than any argument you could construct. Choose your proof sources for genuine relevance to your audience, not just for impressive credentials that don't actually connect. The fourth principle is reciprocity, one of the most reliable forces in human psychology. When someone does something genuinely valuable for you, you feel a pull to return it. This isn't just politeness. It's a deep psychological mechanism that evolved to support cooperation in social groups. And it operates whether or not either party is consciously aware of it. Strategic application of reciprocity means leading with genuine value. Before you need anything from someone, invest in them. Share a useful insight. Make a helpful introduction. Offer assistance with something they're struggling with. Not as a calculated transaction. People sense calculated reciprocity and it backfires, but as a genuine expression of care and generosity. The relationships built on this foundation are qualitatively different from transactional ones. They're resilient, they compound, they become the kind of relationships people genuinely value rather than merely maintain. The fifth principle, and perhaps the most sophisticated, is the psychology of identity. People don't just want things. They want to be certain kinds of people. They have identities, self-concepts about who they are, what they value, what kind of person they're becoming, and they make decisions that are consistent with those identities far more reliably than they make decisions based on pure rational self-interest. If you want to influence behavior at the deepest level, connect your message to identity rather than just to incentives. Help people see how a particular choice is consistent with who they already see themselves as, or who they genuinely aspire to become. When a decision feels like an expression of identity rather than just a calculation about outcomes, the motivation to follow through becomes dramatically stronger and more durable. Finally, understand your own psychology with the same rigor you apply to others. Every bias that shapes others' thinking shapes yours too. Every psychological principle that makes others predictable makes you predictable as well. Strategic self-awareness means developing genuine visibility into your own mental patterns, your characteristic blind spots, your defensive reactions, your identity-driven decisions, your cognitive shortcuts. This isn't about self-criticism. It's about strategic self-knowledge. When you can see your own psychological patterns clearly, you can compensate for them deliberately rather than being silently governed by them. You can create systems that protect your decision-making from your own biases. And you can engage with others from a place of genuine understanding rather than unconscious projection. Chapter 12. Building alliances that actually last. Nobody builds anything significant entirely alone. Look closely at any person who has achieved something genuinely meaningful, in any field, at any scale. And you'll find a network of relationships underneath the achievement. Mentors who opened doors, collaborators who filled gaps, advocates who amplified their voice when they couldn't amplify it themselves, peers who provided honest feedback when everyone else was only offering encouragement. The myth of the lone genius, the isolated individual who succeeds purely through their own brilliance and effort, is almost always a myth. Real achievement is almost always collaborative, even when it looks individual from the outside. Strategic alliance building isn't about using people. It's about understanding that genuine relationships are among the most valuable assets you can build, and that building them requires a fundamentally different mindset than most networking advice suggests. The foundation is an abundance mindset. Scarcity-minded people approach relationships as zero-sum games. If someone else succeeds, there's somehow less success available for them. If they help someone else, they've somehow diminished their own prospects. This mindset produces relationships characterized by guardedness, calculation, and subtle competition, which is precisely why those relationships tend to stay shallow and fail to produce the collaborative value that genuine alliances can create. Abundance-minded people understand that success isn't a fixed pie. Helping someone else win doesn't make you lose. In fact, consistently helping others achieve their objectives creates a network of people who are genuinely invested in your success, which is one of the most powerful strategic assets that exists. This mindset shift changes everything about how you show up in relationships. Instead of calculating what you can extract, you focus on what you can contribute. Instead of protecting your advantages, you look for opportunities to create shared ones. Instead of networking as a transaction, you build relationships as a practice. Understanding what different people actually value and providing it genuinely is the second foundation. Some people value information and insights above almost everything else. Connecting them to a useful perspective or piece of knowledge they didn't have creates enormous goodwill. Others value introductions, being connected to the right people at the right moment. Others need practical support, a collaborator, someone who can help them execute on something they're struggling to do alone. Others need something less tangible, recognition, encouragement, someone who genuinely believes in what they're building. Strategic relationship builders develop sensitivity to these differences and genuine skill at providing value in the specific currencies that matter to the people they care about. This requires paying real attention, noticing what people talk about with energy, what they're struggling with, what they seem to need that they're not getting, and then finding authentic ways to provide it. Network effects are the third dimension of strategic alliance building. The value of a network isn't just the sum of the individual relationships within it, it's the connections between those relationships, the introductions you can make, the collaborations you can catalyze, the knowledge that can flow across the network through you as a connector. When you introduce two people who can genuinely help each other, you create value for both of them simultaneously. You also strengthen your relationship with each because you've demonstrated that you understand what they need and you're willing to invest in their success. Done consistently, this positions you not just as a node in a network, but as a hub, someone who creates value for everyone around them and therefore becomes genuinely central to a community of interesting, capable people. Complementary strengths are the foundation of the most powerful alliances. The partnerships that create truly exceptional results aren't the ones where two similar people do the same things together. They're the ones where different people bring genuinely different capabilities that multiply each other's effectiveness. You might be exceptional at generating vision and spotting opportunities, but struggle with the operational discipline to execute consistently. Someone else might be outstanding at building systems and driving implementation, but need better strategic direction and creative input. Together, you can accomplish things that neither of you could approach alone, not because you've simply added your capabilities, but because you've created something genuinely synergistic. Finding these complementary partners requires honest self-assessment, real clarity about where your genuine strengths lie and where your genuine gaps are, and the willingness to seek out people who are genuinely better than you in those gap areas rather than defaulting to people who are similar to you and comfortable to be around. Weak ties deserve far more investment than most people give them. Research consistently shows that the opportunities most people discover, new jobs, new collaborators, new ideas, new directions, come not from their closest relationships, but from their more distant ones. The people you know well tend to know the same things you know, move in the same circles, and have access to the same opportunities. Your weak ties, people you know less, well, who move in different worlds, are your connection to everything that exists outside your immediate network. Strategic networkers maintain a deliberate portfolio of both strong ties, deep, frequent, high-trust relationships, and weak ties, broader, lighter, diverse connections. They invest in both, not equally, but appropriately. And they understand that the weak ties they casually maintain today might become crucial bridges to opportunities they can't yet anticipate. Finally, strategic networks require ongoing maintenance and evolution. People's circumstances change, industries shift, new communities emerge, and old ones fade. The network that serves you well today may have significant gaps in 3 years as your objectives evolve and the landscape changes around you. Strategic networkers regularly assess their networks honestly. Who's missing? What perspectives am I not getting? Where am I overly concentrated and therefore fragile? What new relationships should I be building now? Not because I need them immediately, but because I'm likely to need them later. And they maintain their existing relationships proactively, not just reaching out when they need something, but showing up consistently during the periods when there's nothing immediate at stake, because the relationships that sustain you through the hardest moments are almost always the ones you invested in long before the hard moments arrived. Chapter 13. Playing the long game, positioning yourself for decades, not just days. Most people think in quarters. Some people, the more strategically minded, think in years. But the people who build truly enduring success, they think in decades. Not because they're ignoring the present, not because they're sacrificing what's needed today for some distant hypothetical future, but because they understand something that shorter-term thinking consistently misses. The most powerful advantages in life aren't created quickly. They're compounded slowly through consistent strategic investment over long periods of time. Understanding this changes how you approach almost everything. The foundation of long-term thinking is recognizing that your current position is just your starting point, not your ceiling. Every skill you develop today creates a platform for skills you'll develop tomorrow. Every relationship you build opens doors to relationships you couldn't have accessed before. Every reputation you establish creates opportunities that didn't exist for the person you were before you earned it. Every asset you accumulate, financial, intellectual, social, reputational, compounds in ways that aren't visible in the short term but become dramatic over longer horizons. This compounding is why the best long-term investments often look inefficient in the short term. Learning a new language, building expertise in an emerging field, developing a relationship with someone who is not yet influential but clearly will be. None of these produce immediate, measurable returns, but each creates option value. Each opens up possible futures that simply aren't available to people who didn't make that investment. Anticipating megatrends is one of the most powerful long-term positioning tools available. The world doesn't change randomly. It shifts along trajectories that are often visible years before they become impossible to ignore. Demographic shifts, technological adoption curves, social and cultural movements, environmental constraints, economic restructuring driven by automation and globalization. You don't need to predict exactly how these trends will unfold, but you can position yourself to benefit from their general direction, regardless of the specific path they take. This might mean developing skills that will become more valuable as certain technologies mature. Building relationships in fields that are currently adjacent to yours, but likely to converge with it. Creating capabilities that are relevant across multiple possible versions of the future rather than optimizing for a single scenario that may or may not materialize. Reputation compounds, and reputation is built in the moments nobody is watching. Every commitment you keep or break, every piece of work you deliver with care or cut corners on, every person you treat with genuine respect or quiet dismissiveness, every moment you're honest when dishonesty would be easier. These don't feel like strategic acts in the moment, but they accumulate slowly, invisibly, and then suddenly visibly into a reputation that either opens extraordinary doors or quietly closes them. The most powerful reputation is built not through carefully managed public moments, but through consistent private behavior over time. Do good work when nobody important is watching. Treat people well when there's nothing to gain from it. Be honest when the comfortable lie would serve you just as well in the short term. These behaviors create compound interest effects that eventually produce results that seem inexplicable to people who haven't been paying attention to the accumulation. Thought leadership and intellectual contribution create leverage that scales beyond your personal time and effort. When you develop genuine insights, frameworks, perspectives, methodologies that others find valuable, and share them generously, you create assets that can generate influence, opportunity, and connection far beyond what any individual relationship or project could produce. A useful framework, shared freely, reaches people you'll never meet and opens conversations you couldn't have initiated directly. Building this kind of intellectual leverage requires consistent production of genuine value, not self-promotional content, but things that actually help people think more clearly, solve problems they're struggling with, or see situations they were confused by. The more you teach, the more your understanding deepens. The more your understanding deepens, the more valuable your teaching becomes. Sustainability is the final frontier of long-term strategic thinking. Strategies that depend on depleting finite resources, your energy, your health, your key relationships, your reputation for integrity, are inherently self-limiting. They may produce impressive results for a period, but they undermine the very foundations they're built on, eventually collapsing under their own weight. The most durable strategies are regenerative. They create value in ways that strengthen rather than weaken their own foundations. They invest in the health and capability of the people involved rather than extracting from them. They build trust and goodwill rather than spending it. They create genuine value in the world rather than just capturing value created by others. Playing the long game means building things that can last, that don't require constant crisis management to sustain, that get stronger over time, rather, than more fragile, and that contribute something genuinely worth contributing to the world and the people you share it with. Chapter 14. From Strategy to Action, Making It Real. Every single day, here's the graveyard where most strategic thinking goes to die. Not in the analysis, not in the planning, not in the frameworks and the insights and the carefully constructed decision trees. In the execution. Because knowing what to do and actually doing it consistently, through uncertainty, through setbacks, through the inevitable moments when motivation evaporates and discipline has to carry the load, are completely different challenges, and most strategic thinking stops at the knowing. Strategic execution is where everything you've learned becomes real or remains theoretical, and it requires a specific set of capabilities that are entirely different from the analytical skills that produce good strategy. The foundation is translation, turning abstract strategic objectives into specific, concrete, actionable next steps. Most strategic plans fail not because the strategy was wrong, but because it never got translated into clear enough actions. The plan says, build stronger relationships, but nobody specifies with whom, through what concrete actions, by when, measured by what indicators. The plan says, develop new capabilities, but nobody identifies which capabilities, what learning path would develop them, how many hours per week will be dedicated to that development, and how progress will be assessed. Strategic execution begins with ruthless specificity. What exactly will happen? Who exactly will do it? By exactly when? With what exactly? Measured how? These questions feel tediously operational after the excitement of strategic thinking, but they're the bridge between intention and reality. Systems and structures beat willpower every time. Relying on motivation and enthusiasm to drive consistent execution is a strategy that works for about 2 weeks. Then life intervenes. Motivation fluctuates, competing demands multiply. The initial excitement fades, and the work starts to feel like work. Strategic executors build systems that maintain momentum regardless of motivation levels. They create environments where the right actions are the path of least resistance rather than requiring constant conscious effort. They establish routines that automate the behaviors most critical to their strategic objectives. They create accountability structures, commitments to other people, tracking systems, review cycles, that produce external consistency, even when internal motivation is temporarily low. Resource allocation is the tactical expression of strategic priority. If your strategy says that building a specific capability is your highest priority, but your time allocation shows that you consistently spend less than 5% of your week on that capability development, Your actual strategy, regardless of what you've written down, is something else entirely. Strategic executors ruthlessly align their resource allocation, time, money, attention, energy, with their stated priorities. And they regularly audit that alignment honestly. Does how I'm actually spending my resources match what I say matters most? When there's a gap, and there almost always is, they make deliberate adjustments rather than just noting the discrepancy and hoping it resolves itself. Feedback loops and honest assessment are the immune system of strategic execution. No plan survives contact with reality unchanged. Conditions shift, assumptions prove incorrect, actions produce unexpected responses. New information arrives that changes the picture. Strategic executors build in regular, honest assessments of whether their execution is actually producing the expected results, not just whether they're completing the planned activities. There's a crucial difference between process compliance and outcome progress. You can faithfully and execute every planned action and still be moving in the wrong direction if the underlying assumptions were incorrect. Strategic execution means measuring what actually matters, progress toward real objectives, not just whether you're checking boxes. And when evidence suggests a course of action isn't working, change course. This sounds obvious, but it runs counter to some deeply ingrained psychological patterns. The sunk cost fallacy, identity attachment to a particular plan, the desire to appear consistent and decisive. Strategic executors develop the emotional discipline to distinguish between temporary setbacks that require persistence and genuine signals that require adaptation. They're committed to their objectives, not to any particular path toward them. Chapter 15. Becoming a True Strategic Thinker. The Journey That Never Ends. You've traveled a long way through these pages. From understanding why reactive living keeps most people stuck, through the mental architecture of strategic intelligence, the 7 principles of advantage, the invisible layers of any situation, the science of decision-making, anticipatory thinking, leverage, communication, crisis navigation, psychological strategy, alliance building, long-term positioning, and daily execution. That's a significant body of knowledge. And knowledge matters. But here's what separates someone who knows these things from someone who has genuinely mastered them. Mastery isn't knowing more frameworks. It's developing the judgment to know when and how to apply them. Beginners apply strategic frameworks consciously and deliberately, which is exactly right for the learning stage. Each concept requires intentional effort. Each application feels effortful. This is normal and appropriate. You're building new neural pathways, new habits of mind, new ways of seeing. With practice, with consistent application across diverse situations, with honest reflection on what worked and what didn't, with the gradual accumulation of real experience, these frameworks begin to internalize. They start operating more automatically, more intuitively. You stop consciously thinking, let me apply the law of positioning here, and start simply seeing positioning dynamics as a natural part of how you perceive situations. This internalization is what frees your conscious attention for the genuinely unique aspects of each situation. The specific people, the particular context, the distinctive details that don't appear in any framework, but that determine how the principles apply in this specific case. Meta-strategic thinking, thinking about your own strategic thinking, is the next level. Recognizing when your frameworks are limiting you rather than helping you. Understanding when your habitual strategic style is appropriate and when it's creating blind spots. Actively seeking perspectives that challenge your assumptions rather than just confirming them. Every strategic framework is a lens, and every lens, by definition, makes some things clearer while making others harder to see. The person who has only one lens, even a powerful one, is more constrained than the person who has cultivated many and developed the judgment to choose the right one for each situation. Character and ethics aren't separate from strategic thinking. They're integral to it. The most sophisticated strategic insight consistently available is this: strategies built on creating genuine value, developing trustworthy relationships, and contributing to outcomes that benefit others as well as yourself tend to be far more durable and powerful than strategies built on extraction, deception, or exploitation. Not just because it's right, though it is, but because it's strategically superior. Strategies that require deceiving or exploiting others create enemies, damage reputation, and eventually attract counter-strategies that can be devastating. Strategies built on genuine value creation tend to create positive feedback loops, growing reputations, strengthening relationships, expanding opportunities that compound in ways extractive strategies simply cannot. Strategic thinking, in service of worthy objectives, isn't a constraint on your effectiveness. It's the foundation of your greatest effectiveness. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, strategic mastery includes knowing when to stop being strategic. Life is not entirely strategic. Some of the most important moments, the deepest connections, the most surprising insights, the most meaningful experiences emerge from genuine presence and openness rather than from calculated positioning. Some of the most valuable things you'll ever do won't fit neatly into any framework and won't produce obvious strategic returns. The highest level of strategic mastery includes the wisdom to put the frameworks down sometimes, to be fully present in a conversation without analyzing it, to follow genuine curiosity without calculating its strategic value, to love people and pursue things that matter without needing them to fit a strategic plan. Strategic thinking is a tool, perhaps the most powerful set of cognitive tools available to you. But tools serve the person who wields them. You are not your strategy. You are a full human being with relationships and passions and values and a unique perspective on the world. And your strategic thinking is meant to serve that full humanity, not replace it. Here's where we leave each other. For now, you have everything you need to begin thinking differently. Not perfectly. Nobody thinks perfectly, and the pursuit of perfect strategic thinking is itself a kind of trap. But differently, more clearly, more intentionally, with greater awareness of what's actually happening around you and greater confidence in your ability to navigate it. The frameworks in this book will only become real through application, through the daily practice of bringing strategic awareness to your decisions, your communications, your relationships, and your choices about where to invest your finite time and energy. Every situation you encounter from this point forward is an opportunity to practice. Every challenge is a chance to apply what you've learned. Every setback is a case study. Every success is data about what works. The question has never been whether you can think strategically. You absolutely can. The question is whether you'll commit to the ongoing practice that strategic mastery requires. not as a one-time effort, but as a permanent orientation toward your own life and the world you're navigating. That commitment, made quietly in this moment, between you and yourself, is where your strategic journey truly begins. The world genuinely needs more people who think this clearly, act this intentionally, and use their capabilities in service of things that matter. You are one of those people. Now go prove it.